لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنام حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله الكريم، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. The burial of Shuhada'i Karbala and the family of Syed Shuhada was not a easy process. There were many things that happened when the bodies were being buried. Even after the martyrdom of Syed Shuhada and his family and his companions, their bodies were not left alone. We see that within the camp of Syed Shuhada, many of the companions had tribal connections with the army of Yazid. One of the most famous of them being was Hur bin Yazid al-Riyahi. He was from the Banu Tamim. Majority of Yazid's army were from Banu Tamim. And hence when Hur bin Yazid al-Riyahi was martyred, when they decided to plunder the bodies, to loot the bodies, and to trample the bodies with horses, they said that we will not trample the body of our son, meaning Hur bin Yazid al-Riyahi. Why we don't want to trample his body? Yes, he died on the side of Hussain, but because he is our relative and he is from the same tribe as us, we do not want to humiliate his body. We do not want to loot and plunder his body. What we want to do is grab Hur's body and bury it in our area. The Banu Tamim, they owned a certain land in Karbala, and the Banu Tamim who died in the army of Imam al-Hussein, they were buried there. However, the bodies of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they were not left alone. After Syed Shuhada and his companions were martyred, they decided to, as we know, they plundered the body. They took the belongings of the Imam. They also decided to trample the body with horses, as it's also recollected in the Ziyaratul Nahi of Imam Sahib al-Zaman, where he said, Assalamu alayka, and peace be upon the one whose body was trampled. Therefore we see that the members of Ahlul Bayt and the Banu Hashim, only their bodies were trampled. Other companions like Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, Habib ibn Mudahir, Muslim ibn Awsaja, their bodies were not trampled. Why? Because they had tribal connections. And therefore, when we see that each Imam, when they were buried, each Imam, when their funeral was taken place, either their funeral was taken place in secret, either their funeral was not announced to everybody. If one of our family members pass away, one of our close relatives pass away, we announce the funeral to everybody. The funeral is on Monday at this time, make sure everybody comes. You would wish for everybody to come. You would wish for the relatives of the family to come, the friends of the family and the well-wishers. They would come to the funeral, recite the Fatiha and do dua for the marhum. For the one who's passed away, it is recommended to make dua for them. Recite Surah Al-Fatiha for them. Recite Surah Inna Anzalna for them. Surah Yasin for them. Many things which are recommended to do for the marhum. However, when we see that the Banu Hashim, when they were martyred, when they were killed, there was nobody there for their funeral. Each Imam and each member of Ahlul Bayt, their funerals were either in secret or the funeral was not announced to anybody. For example, when Sayyidah Fatimah al-Zahra salawatullahi wa salamu alayha, as it's well known, when she passed away, her funeral was not announced. The funeral was hidden from those in Medina. Only a handful of people attended the funeral of Sayyidah Fatimah al-Zahra. Mainly being Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Hassan, Imam al-Hussain, and close companions and the angels. These were the ones who attended her funeral. So we see that each member of Ahlul Bayt, they faced some sort of oppression during their life, and they faced oppression after they passed away. And therefore, when we see the Shuhada of Karbala, they had split into two groups. The first of them being those who were from the Banu Hashim. And there were others who were not from the Banu Hashim. They were from Banu Tamim, Banu Asad, different tribes of Kufa. Their bodies were not humiliated. Their bodies were not trampled on by the horses. And their bodies were not looted and plundered. When Sayyid al-Shuhada was martyred just a couple of hours later, many of the army members of Yazid felt that it was not necessary to humiliate the body of Abu Abdullah. However, there were those who were of the decision that yes, we should humiliate the body. Of those being was Shimar bin Dhil Jawshan, another of them being Sinan ibn Anas, Khuli bin Yazid al-Asbahi. All these companions of Yazid and these associates, they decided to trample the body of the Imam and loot the body of the Imam. Before the bodies were trampled, it is said that Sayyid al-Shuhada had certain pieces of armor on. He had the helmet, he had the chest plate. He also had the sheath of his sword. The sheath of his sword was belonging to the Imam. There are certain reports which said that Imam al-Hussein, he fought with the Dhul Fuqar. But the most famous opinion is that the Dhul Fuqar was not taken to Karbala, because this sword was a sword which came from the heavens. It wasn't an ordinary sword. And therefore the Imams felt that this sword had to be passed down from Imam to Imam. So the famous belief is that the Dhul Fuqar is with Imam Sahib al-Zaman. And that when he comes out, he will show the Dhul Fuqar to the people. So the sheath of the Imam was with him. Also the clothing of the Imam. It is said that Sayyid al-Shuhada, he wore multiple layers of clothing. Why he wore multiple layers of clothing? It's because Sayyid al-Shuhada knew that there will be people who will come to my body and they will take my clothing, they will take my armor, and they will take what belongs to me. One of them took the shirt of Sayyid al-Shuhada. The names and who these people were, it's not important to know these names. However, some reports say that it was Khuli bin Yazid al-Asbahi. He was the one who took the shirt of the Imam. Another one of them took the sandals of the Imam. So whatever they could find on the Imam, they took. There was these specific sandal, and it is said that Sayyid al-Shuhada's sandals had ripped. Because of the Imam, he had to run from one place to another, carrying one body to another. His sandals had ripped. So these animals decided that yes, we will also take his sandals. Although the sandals had no use anymore, since they are been ripped, they are now broken, they have no use, but they still decided to take the sandals of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Another thing that they had taken from the Imam was his turban. It is said that Sayyid al-Shuhada on the day of Karbala, he wore a black turban. And these associates of Yazid, they also took this turban. Now what is it that happened when these things were taken? What happened to these people? It is said that when this person took the turban of the Imam, when he wore the turban, he went mad. He went crazy. Why he went crazy is because this was not of their belongings. This was not their belongings, they shouldn't have taken it in the first place. But they took the turban. When they wore the turban, they went mad, they went crazy. When they wore the sandals of the Imam, after fixing the sandals, it is said that they had become handicapped. Their feet had stopped working because of wearing the sandals of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Another thing which was about to be taken was the trousers of the Imam. The trousers of the Imam was said to have been attempted to be taken. The Sinan ibn Anas, who is most famously known as killing the Imam, the one who decapitated the head of the Imam, is Sinan ibn Anas. We hear Shimr ibn al-Jawshan, but in the books of history it is said it's Sinan ibn Anas. When he came to the body of the Imam, he was about to take the trousers of the Imam. So they went to humiliate the body of the Imam even further. They did not realize that, okay, we have killed the grandson of Rasulullah, we have killed the son of Fatima al-Zahra, we leave the body where it is. However, these associates of Yazid, they decided to take what was on the Imam. So it is said that when this Sinan ibn Anas, when he came to take the trousers of the Imam, there was an earthquake in the land of Karbala. There was an earthquake that came to these people of Yazid. There was an earthquake. It is said that this Sinan ibn Anas, because of the trembling of the earthquake, he fell and became unconscious. When he became unconscious, he saw a dream of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi wa salamu alayha. He saw Sayyidah Fatima in his dream. And he said, if you are going to take the trousers of my son, then know that there will be infinite adab upon you. There will be everlasting punishment upon you. When this Sinan ibn Anas woke up, he saw that he had become bedridden. His arms had stopped working, his legs had stopped working. And it is said that then the associates of Yazid, they had to carry him back to the camps of Yazid. So these things that were taken from the Imam, they all had certain effects on those who had taken these things. Another one of those things that they had taken, we read within the Maqdan, that Sayyid al-Shuhada had a ring. He had a ring that was taken by Khuli bin Yazid al-Asfari. How was this ring taken? It is said that Sayyid al-Shuhada on the day of Karbala, because of lifting so many bodies and carrying bodies from place to place, his hands had become swollen. His fingers had become so swollen that you could not take the ring off. So this animal, Khuli bin Yazid, he cut the finger of the Imam. He cut the finger of the Imam. How is it that he cut the finger of the Imam? It is said that he had a rock. He placed the finger of the Imam on the rock, and then he grabbed another rock and he broke the finger off. And from there he took the ring. And this ring was then later sold in the markets of Kufa. They said, we have killed the grandson of Rasulullah. They said this with passion. This was nothing they were shy about. They did not cry about what had happened. After Karbala had happened, they lived normal lives. Even though that there was punish upon them. There was punish that was about to come upon them. But they lived normal lives. He went to the markets of Kufa and he said, I will sell this ring to the highest bidder. As the highest bidder came for the ring, it is said that Khuli placed the ring on the table for people to see. When Khuli had looked away, the ring had disappeared. Now the scholars say why the ring disappeared is because this was the belonging of the Imam. And therefore, if the belonging of the Imam goes into the possession of the one who it doesn't belong to, it will disappear. It will go out of sight. It will not be in existence anymore. So the ring of the Imam was taken. Another thing which was taken is that Sayyid al-Shuhada, when he came to the land of Karbala, he had a camel. The Imam had brought a camel with him. It is said that after they had burnt the camps of the Imam, the camel was left alone. One of the people said, let's kill the camel. Another one of them said, no, let's not kill the camel, let's take the camel to Kufa, let's kill the camel there, and let's get the meat of the camel and distribute it to the people of Kufa. Let's give it out to the people of Kufa. Why? Because it's a celebration. This was their celebratory norms, that they would kill a sheep or they would kill a camel, get the meat and distribute it to the people. They would go from house to house, like this is the meat of the camel of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And it is said that those who ate the meat of that camel, the meat had the taste of the meat was bitter. It was not a pleasant taste. So after they would eat and chew the meat, it is said that they would spit it out. Why? Because it was bitter, had no flavor, no taste. Another thing that they had taken from the camps was the jewelry of the women. The women had brought certain jewelry. And this Shimr bin al-Jawshan, when he went to the camps, he took the jewelry. It is said that this Shimr, he had an obsession with diamonds and gold and silver and jewelry of all sorts. When he had taken this jewelry, he took this jewelry back to Kufa and he gave it to his daughter. His daughter said, I don't like this jewelry because it has a certain pattern on it and I don't like it. So go to the goldsmith and get him to change the design. So this Shimr went to the goldsmith and he said, can you change the design of the jewelry? He said, yes, it will be no problem to change the design of the jewelry. Therefore, when the goldsmith, when he placed the jewelry into the forge, when the gold and the silver, when they started to melt, it is said that the gold turned into water and evaporated. The jewelry turned into water and became non-existent. Shimr bin al-Jawshan was then informed, the goldsmith told him that the gold has turned into water. Shimr bin al-Jawshan could not believe this. So he went back to his house. He told his daughter that the gold had turned into water. The daughter of Shimr then said, take the rest of the jewelry and take it back to the goldsmith and take me with you. I want to see if this gold turns into water. He goes to the goldsmith, places it again in the forge, and it had turned into water and it had evaporated. After Shimr saw that the gold and jewelry had evaporated, he placed his hands on his head and he said, "Khasirtu dunya wal akhirah." I have lost my dunya and I have lost my akhirah. He lost his dunya because of the jewelry, and he lost his akhirah because he will be placed in the hellfire. So there were certain things that were taken from the camp of the Imam. But what happened later on, when the camp of Sayyid al-Shuhada, when the women and Imam Sajjad sallallahu alayhi, when he was taken to Kufa, they said that on the 13th night or on the 12th night, they were taken to Kufa. Once they were taken to Kufa, it is said that Imam Sajjad, he went back to Karbala to bury his father in Karbala. Now the theological principle is, the belief of the Shia is, that only an infallible can bury an infallible. In the time, for example, in the time of Rasulullah, when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when Rasulullah passed away, the only one to wash him and to bury him was Amir al-Mu'mineen. When Amir al-Mu'mineen passed away, the only ones to bury him was Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussain. When Imam al-Hussain passed away, Imam al-Hussain buried him. And therefore, when Imam al-Hussain was martyred, the only one to bury him was Imam al-Sajjad. So the people ask the question is, how is it that Imam al-Sajjad goes from Kufa to Karbala? How is it that he has traveled this distance to bury his father? We the Shia believe that Allah grants this permission to the Imam to go from one place to another. So Imam al-Sajjad, he was given the ability to go from Kufa to Karbala. When he arrived to Karbala, there was a tribe which had come to Karbala, they had been informed that Sayyid al-Shuhada has been killed along with his companions and his family members. He has been killed. So this tribe by the name of Banu Asad, they had come in their 50s, there was about 50 of them, they had come to Karbala to see what happened. They had come with their women. Once they arrived in Karbala, all they saw was bodies. There were bodies with no heads. There was a certain body which was cut up into pieces. One arm is over here, a finger is over here, a foot is over there. So this tribe of Banu Asad, they saw that what had happened in this place. The women of Banu Asad, they started to look down upon their men. They started to insult their men. Why did they insult their men? It's because the woman said to their men, the men of Banu Asad, they said that you are not man enough to come to Karbala and help Sayyid al-Shuhada. This Banu Asad, they were aware of Karbala, but they did not go to help. Therefore their women, they were ashamed that our men have not helped Sayyid al-Shuhada. So the least you can do is bury the bodies. That's the least of the trust of the Imam that you can do. Bury their bodies and mark the bodies of where each person is. However, the people of Banu Asad, the men of Banu Asad, they realized that there are limbs and body parts everywhere. There is a body which has no head. There is a body which has no arms. There is a body which finger has been cut off. Which part of the body goes to which body? Which foot goes to which body? Which arm? They were not aware of where it goes. It is said the Banu Asad, they saw a man in the distance. They saw the man in the distance and he was approaching them. And it is said that the man, he looked of old age. And we know that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he was in his mid-20s. But the Banu Asad, they described the Imam as being in old age. His beard had turned white. His hair had turned white. As the Imam approached Banu Asad, the Imam said to the people of Banu Asad, what are you doing here? Who told you to come to Karbala? The Banu Asad said that we had heard about Sayyid al-Shuhada. We had heard about what had taken place. Therefore, we are now here to bury the bodies. Imam Sajjad then said to him, you have no right to be here. Go back to where you came from. The Banu Asad said, no, we insist, and that we will bury the bodies. Imam Sajjad then replied to them by saying, you can stay as long as you help me bury the bodies. Because there were many bodies in Karbala. It was not something the Imam could do by himself. So therefore he requested the help of the Banu Asad. The Banu Asad then asked the Imam, they were not aware this was the Imam. They said to him, oh man, where have you come from? He said, I have come from Kufa. And the Banu Asad said to the Imam, so what is your name? He said, my name is Ali ibn Hussain. I am the son of the one who was martyred in Karbala. And I am here to bury the body of my father and his family members and his companions. So how were these bodies then buried? There are many reports and narrations. However, the most famous of them is that Imam Sajjad salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, the most famous of the incidents is that Imam Sajjad had dug 3 graves. The first of the grave was for the companions. Now, was this a really large grave or was this a small grave? The report do not indicate this. There were 3 graves that were dug. The first was for his companions. The second was for the family members of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and the last one was for Sayyid al-Shuhada himself. That's why when we go to Karbala, when we visit, there is different areas in Karbala. We see that Imam al-Husayn's grave is on one side and Abbas ibn Ali's grave is on the other side. We see that if you go out further, if you go about 7 to 8 kilometers out, you will see the grave of Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi. As I mentioned at the beginning, this land was owned by Banu Tamim, so they buried Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi in this place. Then you will see the graves of the Shuhada. And the historical name is called Nawawis. There is Nawawis and there's Karbala. These are two different areas. Nawawis is where the Shuhada are buried, and Karbala is where the family of, say, the Shuhada are buried. And therefore there were three graves which were dug. The first of them was the companions. The second of them were the family members, the Banu Hashim. And the third was for, say, the Shuhada. After Imam al-Sajjad, after he had buried his father, when he buried his father, he placed the soil on top of the graves. The Banu Asad then informed Imam al-Sajjad, how do we identify whose grave is whose? Therefore Imam started to write the sign on top of the graves. When he came to the grave of his father, he said, this is the grave of Hussain ibn Ali, who was killed thirsty in a far foreign land. He had written this on the grave of his father. This is the grave of Hussain ibn Ali, who was killed thirsty in a far foreign land. So this is how the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada was identified, because of this sign. And we know the first person to visit the grave of Abu Abdullah was on the day of Arba'een, on the 40th, Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari, one of the last surviving companions of Rasulullah. It is said that Jabir bin Abdullah, he was blind. Because of his old age, he had lost his eyesight. Therefore, he had asked his companions to take him to the grave of Abu Abdullah. And this was the first Arba'een. The first Arba'een which was visited by the people of Medina. The first of them was Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari. And therefore, what happened to the graves afterwards? We know that within history there were certain figures who had enmity towards the Ahlul Bayt. They did everything they could to demolish the graves of the Ahlul Bayt, especially say the Shuhada. One of those figures being Al-Mutawakkil anullah. This Al-Mutawakkil, who was the associate of the Abbasid Caliphate, he told his associate Ibrahim al-Dazzaj, he said to him, go to Karbala and completely remove and demolish the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada. He didn't just say to him, okay, when you go to the grave, remove any structure around it. He said, make sure you dig up the body and rip it into pieces. This was the order of al-Mutawakkil. When this Ibrahim al-Dazzaj, when he went to Karbala, he saw the sign where it said this is the grave of Hussain ibn Ali. He dug up the grave, and he dug so far that he could not find the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada. When he went back to his leader al-Mutawakkil, he said to him, I could not find his body. There was no sign of the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada in the grave. So al-Mutawakkil was disheartened. He really wanted the body and the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada to be destroyed. However, this Ibrahim al-Dazzaj, he goes to his friends and he says to him, I actually did see the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada. However, I could not bring myself to lift the body and rip it into pieces. Why? Because when he saw the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada, he could smell a fragrance. There was a fragrance which was coming from the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And because of this fragrance, he could not bring himself forth to dig up the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada and to rip it into pieces. So then he said to the people in Karbala, well, I can't find a body. Just place soil on top and leave it how it was. So this is the position of the martyrs, those who die in the way of Islam. Their bodies do not decay. Their bodies are not swallowed by the earth. If our family members pass away, depending on their level of faith, depending on their level of iman, when a scholar, we have stories where a scholar passes away. When a scholar passes away, their bodies are remained fresh in the grave. Their bodies remain as they are buried, whether it's 100 years later, whether it's 200 years later. There is a story of this one specific scholar. His name is Qutb ad-Din al-Rawandi. This Qutb ad-Din al-Rawandi, he is buried in the court area of Sayyidina Rasulullah alayhi salam. By her shrine, there is a courtyard, and in that courtyard there is a grave. And that grave is of Qutb ad-Din al-Rawandi. It is said that when they decided to relocate his body, When they opened his grave, they saw that his body was fresh. It is as if they had just buried the body, although this was about 300 to 400 years later. So the bodies of shuhada remain fresh. So what is the level of Syed al-Shuhada, the master of martyrs? What is his position amongst the shuhada? Therefore, when we see other companions, like the likes of Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi, there was a leader in the Safavid Empire. The Safavid Empire was a dynasty in Iran around 14th century. The leader of that time, Shah Ismail al-Safawi, he decided to go to Karbala. He went to Karbala and he decided to reconstruct the graves of the Shuhada and the Imam. When he got to the grave of Hurr bin Yazid, he was very skeptical. He said, I don't know what to think about this Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi. Do we accept him for what he was? Although he had caused great damage, he had stopped the water for Syed al-Shuhada. He had stopped entry for Syed al-Shuhada in Kufa. So Shah Ismail al-Safawi said, I don't feel the need to reconstruct his grave. I don't see the point, because he had inflicted harm upon Ahlul Bayt. So his associate said, okay, let's open his grave. There should be a cloth on the head of Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi. It's said on the day of Karbala, when Hurr was struck, he was struck on the forehead, which caused him to bleed. And Syed al-Shuhada, with his own cloth, he tied the head of Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi to stop the bleeding. Now this is about in the year 1520. Once they opened the grave, they saw the same cloth on the head of Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi. Once they removed the cloth, blood started to gush out from his head. Lots of blood began to come out of his head. So the first indication was that yes, he is a martyr indeed, because martyrs' bodies, they are preserved and they are not swallowed by the earth. For sinners like me, for example, when we are buried, the earth will swallow us. The body will decay and the bones will remain. But for the martyr, the body remains and they stay fresh in the grave. So this Shah Ismail al-Safawi, he said, this cloth on the head of Hurr, I want it. They tried to remove the cloth, it started to bleed. They placed the cloth back on the head of Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi and they decided to reconstruct his grave. So the lesson is that even after Sayyid al-Shuhada, even after Ahlul Bayt were martyred or they were passed away, their bodies were not left alone. There were people who continuously tried to destroy the graves of Abu Abdullah and the Ahlul Bayt. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He keeps those who try to destroy the graves of Abu Abdullah and Ahlul Bayt away from the graves of Ahlul Bayt, to keep them far away from the graves and the shrines of Ahlul Bayt. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He accepts our mourning of Abu Abdullah, and He gives us the tawfiq that over the next coming years we continue to remember Abu Abdullah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He keeps us firm upon the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He hastens the reappearance of Imam Sahib al-Zaman. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وصل اللهم على محمد وآل محمد.